Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday here. I'm Tara. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about differentiated instruction, particularly in the weirdest school year ever, right? So I know your time is super valuable. I have tons to cover, so I'll get right into it, and hopefully you walk away with stuff that you can use right away in your classroom to help, or in your virtual classroom to help with your students in differentiating instruction. So let me go over a few frequently asked questions first. First of all, yes, this is being recorded. So you will get an email with a link to the recording, or you can also find that at our website, vai.org, or vaei.org, sorry. So you'll be able to access that recording later. Also, all the resources that I talk about, whether it's a website or an app or just an example, all of that is in one hyper document. And that document is right now in the handout, so you can get it there if you want to access that and follow along, or also that will be emailed to you as well. It'll be a Google Doc that you can then, I can also update it if I get new information. So just want to let you know that in case you're frantically trying to write down websites, they're all in there. So that's good to know. Last thing to know is Heather is here with us. So I'll say hi, Heather.
Hi, everyone.
Heather will be answering any questions on the back end. If something's not working, you can type that into the questions. She'll help you out. She'll also be helping us with some polls that'll come up, so we can interact a little bit. So she's helping make sure things run smoothly on the back end. So with that out of the way, let's get started with a poll. Let's find out who is here today. What grade of students do you teach? Or maybe you are an admin teaching several different grades. So let's launch this poll and get a good sense of who is here. You teach lower elementary, upper elementary, middle school, high school, or other. This shouldn't be a tough one for you. So we'll go ahead and close that out. Who do we have here, Heather?
We have 2% lower elementary, 75% upper L, 9% middle school, 4% high school, and 11% other or admin.
All right, so we have a lot in that upper elementary, but a little smattering from all across. I'll definitely make sure all of the strategies shared today can absolutely work K-12, but if I think of examples, I'll try to cater them a little bit more toward that sort of 3-5, 4-5 level, as that makes sense to do so. So thanks for sharing that. Always good to get a sense of who is here. I always like to start by reminding people of our sponsor, Blue Apple. So if you haven't checked these out, if you're looking for project-based learning, some projects that really engage students and making the world a better place and helping you teach your content that don't have to take you a ton of prep time, definitely encourage you to check these out. And I'll actually share one of the projects with you and how to differentiate it. So that will be helpful later on. And for attending this webinar, you get that webinar code, webinar20. Use that when you are checking out to get 20% off of those Blue Apple projects. All right, so let's start off thinking, you just gotta address the elephant of the room. Planning for school in 2020. Be like, here's the best gift I could come up with. This poor little guy. I don't know about you, but anybody else feel like you're just banging your head against the sides of the slide or the wall? Like as soon as you think you figure out what you're going to be doing, oh, now we're going to be virtual, or oh, now we're going to be virtual 2 days a week, or oh, now we're going to have to socially distance this way. And no malice, everyone's doing the best they can, but let's just acknowledge this is definitely a rough year, and you might just be in a camp of like, I'm not even going to try to plan because why spend time planning and it's just going to change. So it's tough out there. But that doesn't mean that we can't focus on teaching and learning. That is what we're here for. So even though planning for this might be next to impossible, let's take some time to think about how can we make sure teaching and learning is at the forefront of what we do, no matter what environment we find ourselves in. So the way we'll do that today, we're going to look very quickly at kind of a framework for differentiated instruction. Sometimes frameworks just help to sort of put things in buckets and learn 3 different ways to differentiate. But then we'll spend most of our time talking about strategies for differentiation, some things that you can try right away, or maybe you're already doing and just kind of feel good about that. And then also ways to make it work in a virtual environment. If you are not in a virtual environment now, you may be, in a moment's notice, or maybe you're in a hybrid environment. So I definitely wanted to touch on some different tools and strategies out there to make it work virtually. All right, so when I think about this framework, first I like to start with, why do we differentiate in the first place? I'm probably going to butcher this Einstein quote, which is probably a really terrible thing to do, but he had this quote, something about if a fish judged himself or evaluated himself by his ability to climb a tree, he would spend his whole life thinking he's stupid, something like that. To which the internet world has made this cartoon out of, and I'd love to credit it, but it's everywhere. I can't find it. But essentially, and you came to this webinar, so I don't think I have to sell you on this, but in case you have to ever sell anybody else on why differentiated instruction is important, I think this cartoon does a great job of showing that, right? Fair isn't always equal. Sometimes different students have different needs, and if we really are in it to advance each student's learning, we have to be attuned to what those different needs actually are. So I always like to start though saying what differentiation is not, especially if this is something that is new for you and you're just sort of experimenting with and starting out with. I like to make sure we all understand that it's not something revolutionary. This is not some new idea. Ever since the sort of one-room schoolhouse, teachers have been differentiating, whether it's based on lots of different grade levels, based on different interests. It's been around for a long time. It's also not something extra. That's the last thing we need, is like another thing to do. I don't want us to think about it like that. And I also don't want us to think about it as being everything to all students at all times, because that will absolutely run us crazier than we already are. It's not crazy enough to just be, teaching and planning in a pandemic. But so it's not that. It's not being everything to every student. So what is it? I really best sort of define it this way. It's a mindset that the teacher's role is not just to cover material or expose students to content, but rather to maximize learning for all students. So it's kind of broad, but essentially I just want to show you, it really is a mindset. It's about covering those gaps in understanding, about, if a student isn't learning in one mode, thinking about how can I do it in a different way to make sure I reach them. Or if they're just feeling disconnected or like it's not relevant to them, seeking to build those bridges. Those are examples of that mindset, not a thing to do, just a way of thinking. So then in terms of a framework, I like to think of 2 sort of reasons to differentiate and then 3 ways to differentiate. So what I mean by reasons is, one we most often think about is readiness. What is the proximity of a student's, readiness of what they know or are able to do to what they need to know or be able to do. So what that difference is, where is their readiness? And so different students might be at different places along that continuum. So we might need to differentiate based on where they are. The next reason you might want to differentiate is interest. And I know there's schools of thoughts out there where teachers aren't supposed to be, entertainers and, kind of cater everything to their students. But if you haven't interested them, if you haven't engaged them, you've lost the battle before you've even started. So knowing what your students are interested in and being able to differentiate your instruction to meet those interests does pay yourself dividends as well as actually advanced learning. So those are 2 reasons to differentiate. 3 ways to differentiate. And I'm going to give you examples of each of these, but it's basically for content, process, and product. So if you walk away remembering anything in terms of the framework, I would say this is the thing to remember. You can differentiate for content, process, and product. And here's what I mean by that. If you want to differentiate for readiness, you could differentiate content by using images or recordings to augment text. Let's say decoding might be an issue or reading might be an issue, but the skill you're trying to get at is not reading or decoding. So help them out there, right? Let's close that gap in that proximity to readiness. Or for interest, have students select their own variables for an investigation, say. We do an investigation with middle school and high school students sometimes called Daphnia, where we take these little water bugs and you can count their heartbeats, and then you can add different substances to them and then see how it affects their heartbeat and count them again. So they can choose, do they want to add nicotine? Do they want to add a Monster drink? Do they want to add a Coke? So they can kind of pick something that is something that they are interested in and see how it affects that Daphnia. So that's just a couple of examples of differentiating for content. For process, maybe a student, in order to get there, they just have trouble kind of, staying on task. So maybe you could create a planning chart for some students to help them stay on task. That'd be kind of differentiating readiness in terms of process. Or for interest, maybe allow them to choose what partners they work with or whether to work alone. Some of those choices really help differentiate for interest in terms of the process of getting to the particular task that you're trying to get them to. And lastly, I think this is one that comes a little more naturally, is product. So what are they going to actually produce in the end? So in terms of readiness, maybe you provide a model of what that student work, that final product needs to look like, or you could leave it open-ended. So those are 2 sides of that continuum. Or for interest, maybe you ask the students to connect what it is that they just learned to something that is of interest to them. I think a lot of times we feel like it's our job as the teacher to kind of make that interest connection. But with all the students that we have, that's not always possible. So don't be afraid to put it on them. Say, hey, you tell me, how does this relate to something that's of interest to you? And right there, you just differentiated for interest. You differentiated that final product. So that's a little bit of a framework. I'm curious to hear from you. What do you most often differentiate for? Content, process, or product? When you're looking to differentiate instruction with your students, which one do you tend to do most? I'm curious. Give you a couple seconds here to answer that. Then we'll round it out. Heather, what did we get here? Oh, look at that. Can get more equal.
We have,
Heather,
sorry, we have 39% content, 39% process, and 37% product. Pretty even.
that is pretty cool. That's pretty even. Sometimes the poll doesn't show up for me, so I was like, it showed up, so I just started reading it. Thanks. All right. So moving on to, I kind of get through that quickly because I just like to have that framework in mind, but getting into strategies, things that you can use right away. Like I said, maybe you're already doing some of these things and it's just helpful to think about them in terms of differentiation tools. So the first one I like to mention is sentence starters. Hold on. There we go. For sentence starters, this is just a great way to, for those kids that are just stuck, right? They just need a little help pushing them on the way to get them started. The tip that I want to give you for sentence starters, sometimes we think these are only useful for those students that are struggling, but actually they can be used to help, sort of accelerate or challenge learners as well. So for example, let's say you're talking about cause and effect. So for a student who's just ready for basic recall, you might give them the sentence starter. One example of cause and effect is, and they just sort of fill that in. You're getting at the strategy and they're providing that direct recall. Let's say for students that you feel like have that, you could give them a sentence starter like, one way the effect might be different is, and then they have to think about what are some different causes that might change that effect, right? So that's a way to actually challenge them, but both of them are getting sentence starters so it doesn't look like one of them maybe is struggling and one of them isn't. So sentence starters, a great way to differentiate for readiness and do that with content. That's a great way to use that. Anchor charts is another just really classroom favorite. This is just really a way to anchor learning as you are constructing knowledge together in the classroom. Capture that information on chart paper, on sort of large format, and use colors and bright imagery if you can. And that's just a great way for those students who need that visual cue, to remember what was the key sort of parts of that learning. They can always look back up there, see that anchor chart and have that. Great tool for English language learners. This is also a great way to differentiate for that readiness, right, in terms of process, right? It's a way to kind of, during the process of learning, have that way to look up and get that little tip. Also in the hyperdoc for this one, there is an article that has tons of great examples of anchor charts. So if you're not familiar with them or just want to see lots of different examples, it's a great place to look. Exit tickets, tried and true, great favorite. Just there's so much value in taking just a few seconds at the end of class, whether it's at the end of a Zoom meeting or the end of an in-person class, to ask a few questions formatively. And this could be anything. It could be to gauge, from readiness. It could be to gauge where their understanding is of the topic, or it could be for interest, to say, what are they interested in? So you can know how you can kind of morph the next day's lesson into the interests that they have. So exit tickets are a great way to help students think deeply, help increase that participation, and also help them really just sort of for you to get to know them as well. So definitely check out, there's some sample questions you can look at in that hyperdoc as well, and also some tools. If you're looking at like just a digital world, things like Pear Deck, Flipgrid, Kahoot, all those sorts of things are great for doing exit tickets, as well as just a straight up Google form. We'll talk more about those later as well. The other thing is flexible grouping. So sometimes we get into a rut where we're sort of always having the same group of students, particularly I think in elementary, where maybe we group by reading level and they just sort of stay in those same groups. So obviously the more diverse students that they can be around, the more diverse thinking they can be around, the more diverse their thinking can be. So I encourage you to just change up those groups, whether it's by interests, topic, ability, learning style, just random, lots of different ways to do flexible grouping. And it's a great way, especially I think this is a good one I like to use to differentiate for interest and the final product. Like you can say, which one of you want to create a book at the end of this? Which one of you, how many of you want to create a podcast? And so you can kind of create them into groups based on what they were interested in and then what that final product is going to be. Lastly, I just want to point out the good old think, pair, share. If you aren't doing this regularly in your classroom, I definitely encourage you to do it. It's an easy way to differentiate instruction in that every time you ask a question, give students a couple minutes to think, or maybe just a couple seconds to think to themselves, to share with a partner, and then you can call out different groups to share as a whole class. The great part about this in terms of differentiation is that you are able to give those students who need a little bit more time to process their thoughts, that think time. But the other thing is all those kids who always want to answer every single question, with that pair opportunity, they get to talk every time. So I love that about that strategy. This one I admittedly have found a little bit harder to do virtually. The best one I can come up with, if you have examples, email them to me. I'd love to hear it. Is to create a Google Doc for each pair or for each small group. And that way, whenever you do the pair, they can sort of type into that Google Doc and sort of have that as a collaborative document where they share thoughts there. It's tend to work okay. All right, so of those, I'm curious, sentence starters, anchor charts, exit tickets, flexible grouping, think, pair, share, which of these do you think you will use in your classroom?
We have 41% sentence starters, 48% anchor charts, 55% exit tickets, 52% flexible grouping, and 61% think, pair, share.
Okay, again, pretty even. Looks like that think, pair, share is something a lot of folks want to make sure they're doing. Also, if you're interested in the flexible grouping, the article in the hyperdoc provides a great little chart for like things to weigh, factors to consider when you're thinking about weighing or grouping in different ways. So that's a nice little tip in that article. All right, let me give you a few more strategies, a little bit more meatier ones. So choice boards, been around for a long time, certainly come into a lot of favor as spring, everybody went to digital learning and people had to give students a lot more choice because they weren't there to direct learning the whole time. So choice boards are a great way to differentiate instruction. I think just a couple tips, be mindful of what it is you're differentiating for. What are you putting in those boxes as options? Make sure you know, are you trying to differentiate for readiness or interest or content, process, or product? Make sure you kind of know what you're trying to do with that. And don't try to do them all in one, just be mindful of what it is you're trying to get across. I think the biggest thing for choice boards is just to make sure you look at all those options there and make sure none of them are busy work. Every option should be advancing learning in some way. And then I also encourage you to use, whether it's those exit tickets we talked about, but use formative assessments to decide what goes in there so that they're kind of a dynamic choice board. It's really reacting to where your students are right now. And then the other one, kind of like we talked about earlier, make sure all the options look similar in terms of difficulty. You don't want one to look, glaringly easy compared to another one. And we'll look at some examples of that with our tiered assignments in a minute as well. But I like to show some examples of choice boards because there's so much variety and creativity that have happened with these. So just a few here just to give you some visual cues as to how you can construct these. There's the menu motif, right, with appetizers, main dish, and dessert. You could sort of say, whether you want them to choose one from each or choose 2 appetizers and a main dish or all sorts of different ways you can direct that. There's also the tic-tac-toe construct, always a fun one. I like this one, it's just really open-ended, choose your own assessments. I love the idea that there's propose an idea to me. I thought that was kind of a clever way to do that in the middle there. So that's pretty open-ended. Now here's one that's really kind of focused, just looking at vocabulary. Lots of different ways that the students could choose to show their knowledge of vocabulary. And this was just sort of a fun construct. If you're studying water, all right, make an acronym out of water and use that to kind of sort of formulate your choice board. So just a few examples there that might make it fun as you think about how you might want to do choice boards. And in that hyperdoc, there's also a link to a template to create your own choice boards as well. The next one I want to tell you about is interest inventories. If you want to differentiate for interests, you've got to know what your students are interested in. So this is really sometimes just as simple as asking them, conducting those interest surveys. And that could just be a simple Google form or polls within whatever virtual learning platform you're using, or just straight out, hard copy surveys if you are in the classroom. So any kinds of questions, I've provided this here, but just getting to know them, a little bit of information goes a long way with helping you sort of tie your instruction to the things that they're interested in and to making sure they know that you care, that they matter to you. Another creative way to do this is to find out their drive language. This is something that we created. If you remember the book about your love languages, right? How do you receive love? Well, we sort of took that and turned it on its head and say, what's your drive language? What motivates you? And there's a little quiz in the hyperdoc that you can take yourself to find out your own drive language. or you can give it to your students to find out what motivates them. Is it, relatedness, those sort of relationships? Is it having some autonomy? Is it mastering, different pieces of a set of things to do? Or is it purpose? So those are some things that can be helpful to you in understanding what drives your students. Another fun one, certainly if you're in a virtual world, but even if you're in an in-class world, I thought these are really creative, to have your students create virtual lockers where they sort of decorate their locker with the things that are interesting to them. That helps you get to know them, helps them get to know one another. And it's just a fun way to, especially if you are all virtual, to sort of bring back some of that feeling of school into that digital world. And again, there's links to how to create those in the Hyperback. All right, next one is tiered assignments. So this is really mostly used for readiness, although I will show you an example that I think is more for interest. But it's sometimes one that takes the longest in terms of planning. So I'll give you several examples here of what tiered assignments look like. But it's essentially, giving two different levels of the assignment, two different ways to complete the assignment. And the important thing here is to remember that to keep the amount of work the same. If you're creating a poster, you're creating a poster. Don't have someone create 3 posters just because, they're doing well. We're going to sort of penalize them with more work, right? We want to keep the amount of work the same. We also want to make sure we keep in mind that learning target. I think this is particularly important when you're looking at how to challenge students. Sometimes we can take it way off into sort of tangents that seem fun, but we want to still relate it back to that learning target. Keep that, at the forefront of our minds. And if you're looking for sort of, very simply the verbs, sort of the action to do in tiering these assignments, let's go back to our friend Bloom's taxonomy to look at that. Some of those lower levels, remember, understand, those can be the level that you put in your tier 1 assignments, right? You're just building understanding of something. And then your tier 2 can be where you sort of apply, extend, analyze, those sorts of things to really take and use that content in some way. So again, I'll show you some examples here. Let's say our learning target was to communicate information about how recycling impacts our environment. So that might be middle school or upper elementary, let's say. If that's your learning target, tier 1 might be to create a poster that shows your understanding of recycling and include detailed information about how recycling affects our local environment. It's pretty direct to the standard. You're just asking for recall that they've got it. If you have some students you feel like they really already have that and you need to challenge them a bit, maybe you give them this as a tier 2, to create a poster, again, same level of work, but this time summarize your understanding of recycling. You're gonna do that shorter, and include an overview of different perspectives on recycling and how it affects our local environment. Just adding something like that, different perspectives. It doesn't seem like more work, but obviously there's a lot more analytical thinking, critical thinking going on to sort of think about a variety of different viewpoints on this particular topic. All right, I'll give you 2 more examples. Let's say you just finished a science experiment at any grade level. This could be an assignment for them. Tier 1, write a letter to a friend recapping the experiment we did today and why it's important. So it's not taking away critical thinking. They still have to think about why that's important. But tier 2 might be write a letter to a friend describing what you think might happen if you changed one variable in the experiment we did today. They still have to convey their understanding of what they learned, but they're kind of providing a little bit more analytical thought to it. All right, one more example here. This is if you are teaching biography, let's say, sort of the writing form biography. One might be to create a chart or other visual that identifies the elements of a biography in the memoir you just read, right? So they've read a memoir, they're gonna write, what is a biography? This is the one that I think is a little bit more for interest. So let's say you have those sort of creative thinkers in your class, right? The Michelangelos, that you wanna give them an opportunity to express themselves. You could take that same idea and just twist it a little bit and say, imagine if the subject of your memoir made a different choice at some point in their life. Rewrite a biography, a portion of the biography, reflecting how that choice might have changed things. So you see, they still have to make sure they understand biography because they're going to be rewriting a portion of the biography as a biography, but they're able to kind of put a little bit of a creative spin on it. All right, got 2 more strategies for you here. This one, next to last one, is RAFT. And this is an acronym. It stands for Role, Audience, Format, and Topic. This one I feel like is best to differentiate for interest and product. So what I like to do is give them the topic and then have them come up with the role, audience, and format. So for example, here's this is linked to this is in that hyperdoc where you have lots of different opportunities or options for what your role might be. Lots of different options for audience and format and topic. But like I said, I like to give the topic, and then this can be a nice tier 2 kind of technique to use in tutoring assignments as well. So to see an example of this, let's say you're looking at the topic is how is To Kill a Mockingbird relevant in today's society? Well, I might give them that as the topic and then ask them to come up with what role are you going to play? Well, respond from the perspective of one of the story characters. So maybe they're going to be Atticus Finch, maybe they're going to be Scout. And then they have to think about audience. Choose an audience your character would likely present to. So if I chose the role of Scout, who would Scout likely want to present to? And what format would she choose to write this in? Would she write a letter? Would she write a rap? Would she, what would she do? So that's a way to provide a lot of choice and interest, and also kind of really change that final product based on what the students' interests are. But you're still getting a lot of the content knowledge that you need to get, but adding in those critical and creative thinking skills as well. Lastly, let me just check time here. I'll roll through this really quickly, is project-based learning. So essentially, if we're looking at, differentiated instruction being a mindset that the teacher's role is to maximize learning, and then project-based learning being those authentic experiences that really engage students, I really feel like the best way to create time for differentiation is to engage those students to as open-ended projects and sustained inquiry as you possibly can. When you have that sustained inquiry, lots of opportunities for differentiation show up. So I'll show you just a quick example of that. One of the projects, one of those Blue Apple projects, is called Moments to Remember. And in this, students make friends with a resident of a retirement home. They talk to them, interview them, listen to their story, and then they craft a biography. And they create a little heirloom book of that biography, and then they share it online so that the friend can share it with their families. Really beautiful, beautiful projects, tons of content opportunities to teach math, science, social studies, reading, language arts. But we're talking about differentiated instruction. So I just want to show you the variety of ways that show themselves in terms of differentiating instruction. I'm going to actually skip over this one and go to all this variety of them. So one might be for content. Students may structure the biography chronologically. That's kind of a fairly easier recall. But others, you might have them structure their biography around a theme. What was the theme of this person's life? Just a little bit more difficult or, take on a biography. What about process? Some students, you might give them more steps to create their books. Like, here's a step-by-step instruction for creating this book. Whereas others, you might give them one general set and say, go for it. Product. Remember, at the end, they create this book and then they present it to their seniors. Let's give them some choice in how they choose to share this book. Do they want to put it on TikTok? Do they want to put it on YouTube? How else do they want to put it on it? In terms of content, writing that biography, you could provide sentence starters for some students to kind of write that biography. Others, you could take off that scaffold. So this is just, a short example, but a project like that gives you so many different opportunities to differentiate instruction that I encourage you to think about project-based learning as a way to differentiate. All right, so one more poll here. Let's see, which of these do you think you might use with your students? Choice boards, interest inventories, tiered assignments, the RAFT strategy, or project-based learning? Choose as many as you'd like. All right, Heather, what do we have here?
We have 73% for choice boards, 36 for interest inventories, 36 for tiered assignments, 35 for RAFT, and 55 for project-based learning.
Okay, so choice boards and project-based learning look like the top two there, and those are some really high dividend strategies. So I think those are great ways to kind of take this endeavor of differentiated instruction. All right, I'm going to round it out with some strategies for virtual learning. So the key thing here is I'm just going to tell you quickly what these things do, and in the HyperDoc there is a 1-minute video tutorial of how to do it. So we won't spend a lot of time showing you how, but I'll tell you what it is, so if you have interest, you can go check it out there. So Edpuzzle, this is a super favorite. If you're not using it digitally, you're going to want this one. This is a way to see if your students have watched the videos that you put up for them to watch. You can see if they've watched it, how much they've watched of it, when they watched it. You can also embed little questions in there for them. So it's a great tool for monitoring that. Google Forms, you'll see I have several in Google Forms. I'm a big fan. But you can differentiate the form based on their answers. So you can set it so that if they answer a certain way, they're going to get this set of questions. And if they answered a different way, they're going to get that set of questions. So you can provide more practice on something, let's say if they didn't get it right. So really great tip there on how to set up your Google form to do that. This is a basic one, but I just don't want to forget it. Just using Google Forms to get student feedback. The video there shows how a teacher does it every week just to say, how is it going with their students, to learn things about them. But there's any number of ways. But if you aren't using Google Forms, really simple, easy way to get in there and start using that to get feedback. Automatic notifications. There's an add-on in Google Forms where you can set it so that after, like I've set it where as soon as they have a certain number of people have filled out the form, I'll get an email notifying me. Or I can have that sent to students where if they fill out the form, they get an email sent to them with the next assignment. So that's a way to kind of differentiate that process by giving it to them at the pace that they finish. Or you can have it send an email to a parent if they fill out a Google form. So great little tip there. Online voice recorder. So let's say you're worried about, will they understand these directions? So you can record your voice, voicing those directions, or some other piece of content that you just feel like might be inaccessible. You can voice that for them, embed that right into your presentation. Those are the ones that have video tutorials. This one's just an idea for how to make those Zoom meetings a little more interactive. Anytime you need them to vote, maybe you're doing interest inventory, or maybe you are asking, if they agree with something, have them turn off their cameras and then turn them on if they want to vote, if they want to say yes. So it's just a fun way to kind of turn cameras on and off to indicate their answers. And then finally, there's a link in that hyperdoc to a ton of really great tutorials. So pretty much every Google Suite product, as well as some other fun digital tools. This document, I don't know who created it. I think her name is on the form, but it has links to tutorials, video tutorials in English and Spanish, and there's some that are teacher-facing, student-facing, and parent-facing. So if you're doing a hybrid environment where you have the kids and they're working in some digital tools and you're sending them home and the parents don't know how to help them, there's some great tutorials there you can send them for that. All right, I told you we had a lot, so I sped through it. I want to just end by asking you, if you do like what you heard here, there's nothing we like better than helping teachers make this job more rewarding than it can possibly be and a little easier. So if you are interested in any of these topics and want a voice in your PD, share this with your administrator. Let them know that we have something called Flex PD, where we can really customize your professional development to the things that you as the teachers actually want and will use. I also want to invite you to attend our Return to Learn workshop series. This is all for you teachers. This is going to be an incredibly difficult year. Let's just be honest. So we have set up these 3 workshops. The first one starts at the end of September, all about tips and tricks for distance learning. The next one, 2 weeks later, is about engaging students in distance learning. How do you keep that engagement up? And then the next one, 2 weeks later, is all about making sure we're not forgetting those social emotional learning. How do we kind of embed that into our pandemic teaching? So we thought these 3 workshops would be a great way to support you guys as you are entering into this really strange school year. Super affordable, $15 each or $35 for all 3. So tell your administrator to sign your whole team up for these, because they're really going to be a help to you as you get started, if you haven't already started this crazy school year. So I want to just end with giving you the opportunity to win one of those Blue Apple projects that I mentioned at the beginning. And that Moments to Remember is one of those Blue Apple projects. There's 10 of them. So if you would like one of those projects, they are appropriate for K-8 and blind to content standards. Here's all you got to do. I shared with you a gift that captured how I felt about the start of this school year. So I love gifts. I'm sort of a sucker for them. So email me with the gift that you think captures, or meme, or whatever you have that you feel like captures the start of this crazy school year. I would love to see what you come up with. And if you give that to me by the end of the day, Friday, on Monday, I will choose one of those to win a free project. And if you aren't the winner, though, remember you've got that coupon code up there that will also be in the hyperdoc. So I encourage you to check out those projects, and I hope to see you on the upcoming webinar series. So I thank you very much again for your time, for your commitment to differentiated instruction for your students. Just by spending time with us here today, I can tell you are a teacher who stands out, and I wish you the best of luck. And if there's any way we can help, we're here to do so. Thanks so much, everybody.